Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to the CEPT University lecture series. So thanks everyone for making it here. It was a short notice, and thanks Dr. Christophe for agreeing to give a lecture. So some of you, and I think most of you would be familiar with Dr. Christophe's work, but I would just like to formally introduce him. Dr. Christophe Jaffrelot is a senior research fellow at CERI Science ISPO, CNRS, professor of Indian politics and sociology at the King's Institute London, and also a global scholar at Princeton University. He has been a visiting professor at Columbia University, Yale, and Johns Hopkins. He works at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace as a non-resident scholar as well. Amongst his publications are The Hindu Nationalist Movement and Indian Politics, 1925 to 1990s, India's Silent Revolution, The Rise of the Lower Caste in North India, Dr. Ambedkar and Untouchability, Analyzing and Fighting Caste, and The Pakistan Paradox, Instability and Resilience. He has also co-edited with Laurent Gayer a volume by the title Muslims in Indian Cities, Trajectories of Marginalization. Most of you might be also reading his articles in the Indian Express. He writes for the Indian Express and the Caravan magazine. And for his writing, he also received the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism. So that's Dr. Jaffrelot for you. And today he has agreed to speak on a topic that he's working on presently. I remember, I think around the same time we had you talk about the caste, the whole question of caste and instability in Gujarat. So today is going to talk about Pakistan-Saudi Arabia relationships and the Islamic connection. That's the topic today. So thanks for coming here, and please deliver your talk.
Thank you, Pratyush, and thank you, Bimal, for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure to be here. Even if indeed subjects change, I'm oscillating between the two countries, India and Pakistan, visiting one after the other. So now I speak about India in Pakistan, about Pakistan in India. It's much safer. So I'll be brief. I'll try to present this in 20 minutes or so that we'll have time for Q&A, and you may not be that interested in the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan relations, so we may focus on Pakistan only if you want to look at the dynamics of Pakistan at the moment, since we have a transition with a new chief of army staff, and that's of course the most important man always in this country. And also, and this is a transition for my own talk, as you may have seen, even though it was underreported in the Indian newspapers, the former chief of army staff, Raheel Sharif, has just been appointed at the helm of a new coalition known as the Islamic Military Alliance to Fight Terrorism, IMAFT. And Raheel Sharif, by the way, is in Davos these days, publicizing this new role of his. I don't think it has ever happened before that a former chief of army staff becomes the head of a coalition that is led by another country, because this coalition is led by Saudi Arabia for sure, and this IMAFT will be headquartered in Riyadh. 39 countries, including Turkey, Qatar, Indonesia, so many will be part of it. This is clearly a reflection of the affinities that are there between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. So what I'm going to do now is to put these affinities in some perspective. I always do some history, whatever the subject is, and usually it's relevant. So I'll go back somewhat in history to qualify these Saudi-Pakistani relations. Today it's self-evident that they are close. It's new. It's not such an old story, and to understand this, you need to go back to the Pakistan movement itself. And once I'll have done that, I'll qualify this relationship from a different perspective, showing why there are factors in favor of this rapprochement and why there are factors that will make this rapprochement not only difficult, but or not only dangerous, but also difficult. Well, South Asian Muslims have invented their own brand of Islam that is rooted in Sufism, that is rooted in a sacred space that is not in Mecca or Medina, but that is in Ajmer or in Nizamuddin Delhi. And this is in itself a kind of point of departure between South Asian Muslims and Middle Eastern Muslims. You know, none of these Sufi saints ever went on Hajj. No, they did not feel the need to go there. Muhammad Chishti, Baba Farid, name one. Why should he go there? By the way, none of the Mughal emperor went on Hajj. Yes, they sent their ladies, but not only they sent their ladies, they did not go there by themselves. So when the idea of Pakistan, and I cut a long story short now, crystallized, the separatists of the Muslim League were not that interested in the Arab model of Islam. Iqbal is a very interesting case in point, because Iqbal certainly in his poetry places Mecca and Medina, Hijaz, the sacred Arabian land, at the center. So many poems on this part of the world. You know, he has in one of these poems written, "What does it matter if my wine jar is Persian? At least the wine is Arabian, Hijazi. What matters if the song is Indian? Hindi. The tune, after all, is Arabian, Hijazi." So he looks towards Mecca, even though he will never go on Hajj himself. He went to Port Said, but never crossed over to go to Mecca or Medina. And that's a reflection of another of his ideas. Well, of course, the center of Islam is there, but we are not turned towards this center. And in the very interesting presidential address he pronounced for the, I will read that off, for the Muslim League session, the 25th session of the Muslim League, 29th December 1930, when he conceived the idea of Pakistan, even though the word was not there. He has this very famous sentence saying, of course, this separate country will be good for us, Indian Muslims, but it will be good also for the rest of the Muslims, because it will give, I quote, to Islam an opportunity to rid itself of Arab imperialism. There'll be a Muslim republic. There'll be a Muslim state that will be able to compete with the country that the Saudis have just started. Saudi Arabia was just born. And in the book he published at the same time, early 30s, The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, he certainly acknowledges the importance of Abdul Wahab, the founder of Wahhabism, but he says this man was conservative. So we should not draw our inspiration from Wahhabism. We'll be modern. And by the way, he was not for the Khilafat. He said it's perfectly fine if there is a democratic assembly in Constantinople that rules the countries of the Muslim. So the founders of Pakistan were not looking towards West, if you want. They were not looking at Saudi Arabia as a model. They were a model. And if you look at their writing in the 40s, before and after partition, it's very clear. Yaqut Ali Khan said in 45, we are building a laboratory. We are building the first Islamic republic. And we want to rally around the others to that project, rally the others around that project. We will be the leaders of the Muslim world. And Jinnah, in December 46, spent quite some time in the Middle East for projecting his idea of Pakistan. In Egypt, he talked about a worldwide Islamic League. At the same time, in India, sent John Philby, and Philby is a name you're familiar with because his father will be a very important man. His son will be a very important person. Was the advisor of the King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, and they were thinking about a Muslim Islamic League in Delhi. They were not in Riyadh, they were in Delhi at that time. In 49, Khaliquzaman, the president of the Pakistan Muslim League, said Pakistan will bring all Muslim countries together into Islamistan. Pakistan is only the jumping off ground. The time is not far distant when the Muslim countries will have to stand in line with Pakistan, and then only the jumping ground will have reached its fruition. So Pakistan is, the founders of Pakistan looked at their country as the country that will take the lead, and they were certainly not looking at Saudi Arabia as the leader of the Muslim world. But that's what happened. The Saudis and many other Muslim countries were upset by one decision the founders of Pakistan made, that was to rally to join hands with the US, the best friend of Israel. By joining the Baghdad Pact, 55, the Saudis considered that the Pakistanis had stabbed them in the back. This is the sentence the ambassador of Saudi Arabia in Karachi at that time said himself. So they turned their back, and Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries, turned their back to Pakistan. And Pakistan was left with only two friends in the Muslim world, Turkey and Iran. And Egypt they had alienated because in 56, during the Suez crisis, they were on the wrong side. So, interestingly, in the 60s, Pakistan was not again looking towards Saudi Arabia because it was looking towards Tehran and Istanbul. And they built a coalition, an economic consortium, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. And of course, on the contrary, Saudi Arabia took the lead, and took the lead by starting the Muslim World League and by starting the Organization of Islamic Conference. These two organizations, very important organizations for federating the Muslim world, took place in 62 and 69. So the 60s are a time when, again, there is no convergence at all between the Saudis and the Pakistanis. Things will change after the 1971 war. That was clearly a trauma for Pakistan, and then Pakistanis, and among them Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, visited Middle Eastern countries, 22 countries in few weeks, to make new friends in order to resist India more effectively. They considered that in 71, neither China nor the US had helped them sufficiently vis-à-vis India. So they needed new friends. And they needed new friends for one thing, mostly to make a bomb. So that was the main objective. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto wanted to be nuclear, because nuclear weapons would be the great equalizer. Who would pay for that? Saudi Arabia and others. The Islamic bomb was the idea. They gave the money. What did the Pakistanis give in exchange? Soldiers. There is one export product. India has IT professionals as export product. Pakistan has officers, army officers. And 20,000 army officers and soldiers went to Saudi Arabia from Pakistan to make them safer. That was at that time. There were many threats. So this was the deal. That went on, of course, rather well, because by the mid-80s, they got the bomb. By 83, 84, 85 for sure, they got the bomb. From China, but paid by petrodollars. The 80s, of course, made this rapprochement between these countries even more substantial because of the joint venture between Saudis and Pakistanis in the anti-Soviet jihad in Afghanistan. Then they were really together. Zia was more than happy to welcome Arab fighters, including bin Laden, who reached in the late 80s, 87, 88. And before that, Azam, the Palestinian ideologue. That was the culminating point of this interpenetration osmosis that was, of course, based on the defense of Islam. That was also the time of the Islamization policy of Zia. Zia Islamized law, education, the fiscal system, the zakat and ushr ordinance was drafted by someone sent from Riyadh itself. So they were really making the public institutions more like what they were in Saudi Arabia already. These are the years of the Saudi Arabization of Pakistan. So that's the background, which helps us to somewhat qualify these affinities, because they were not there forever. They are an historical process. But of course, we end up with a real rapprochement. There is no doubt that by the 80s, these two countries had become very close. And if we now turn to the situation of today, the legacy of the 80s, there are pros and cons for analyzing the future dynamics of this rapprochement. The pros can go in three directions. First, there is no doubt that there is now a constituency for Saudi Arabia in Pakistan. And this constituency is primarily made of groups that they have financed for decades via madrasas. The network of Saudi-funded madrasas are expanded since the 80s dramatically. But not only madrasas, Ali Hadith movement. The Ali Hadith are, of course, the Salafis, which are the closest to the Wahhabis. Among the Ali Hadith movements, you have, of course, Lashkar-e-Taiba, whose leader, Hafiz Said, has been trained in Saudi Arabia and has retained strong connection with Saudi Arabia. So there is a constituency. The Saudis have their own people, so to speak, in the country. And these people always agitate in favor of Saudi Arabia whenever need be. I'll return to that, but when the Pakistanis said, no, we will not help you in Yemen, 2 years ago, I'll return to that, who were in the street? These people, because they wanted this support to be given to the Saudis. So there is one clear connection, that is this. Of course, secondly, the army has usually been in favor of close relations with the Saudis for the financing, for the the reasons I've just mentioned in terms of who financed the weapons. Well, the weaponry. The Saudis did. There is a new reason. You will be surprised to know, I'm sure, that last year Saudi Arabia has been the largest importer of Pakistani arms. Of course, they have bought many more things to many other countries, but still, it's there. And there is a third link that is more political, you can say personal. Some families of Pakistani politicians have very close relations with Saudi Arabia, and of course, the Nawaz Sharif family is a case in a point in case. You will be surprised to know, if you don't, that Nawaz Sharif, after spending 7 years on exile in Jeddah, had his daughter married to one of the grandsons of King Fahd, and has a lot of business interest in Saudi Arabia. In fact, his father already had invested there. These are businessmen turned politicians, and the PMLN is, of course, their party. Fourth, it's not probably as structural, but still, remittances. Very difficult for Pakistan not to somewhat adjust to Saudi demands simply for financial reasons. This country, Pakistan, receives $19 billion as remittances every year, and $6 billion only come from Saudi Arabia, and $3 billion more from the UAE. That's a lot, and that's very important for a country that is always with problems, with financial problems, and very heavy debt. So these are the reasons why the links should be very strong, and are very strong. But there are reasons which needs to be taken care of to somewhat qualify this proximity, and explains why Pakistan does not bow to Saudi Arabia always, because they don't. Well, the first factor there is Iran. Well, let's take it in a different order. I'll deal with Iran the last. It's the most important one, but it'll come last. No, the first factor I would like to mention is other politicians. The PMLN is pro-Saudi, the PPP is pro-Iran. So we see Iran already there, but in a different perspective. PPP, Pakistan People's Party, has been created by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto has been suspected of being Shia. He married an Iranian woman, and Benazir, in any case, has been brought up as a Shia, probably. And when the widower of Benazir, Ziv Zardari, was president of Pakistan, he wanted to tie up with Iran, and in 2013 he went that as far as starting the process of building a gas pipeline between both countries, something the Saudis looked at with a very, very negative perspective. In fact, at that time, the Saudis hardly related to the civilians. They talked only to the military, knowing fully well that that's where the power led anyway, but even more because they did not consider Zardari as reliable. But it's a fact that when the PPP is in office, the Saudis are not the number one or the only partner in the Middle East. Second important point to be made, the resilience of Sufism in Pakistan. We go by stereotypes always, and it's much more, I would say, effective for the media to report all these blasts, all these attacks against dargahs and Sufi tombs. yes, there is a kind of wave of Sunni militant activities which target Sufi places, but people do still go to Sufi places. And when you visit one of these tombs during the Urs, especially in Sindh and South Punjab, it's absolutely clear that popular Islam is not Wahhabi. Popular Islam is Sufi. So that's, of course, a very important qualification. They have somewhat failed for the moment to capture the imagination of the ordinary Muslims, quote unquote. And even the Deobandis have not abandoned the cult of saints totally. It's very interesting. The Ali Hadith keep telling the Saudis, look at these Deobandis, they are not that good, you know. Third, some of the good Islamists of the Saudis are seen as bad Islamists by the security establishment of Pakistan. And there is one category that needs to be highlighted there, the Sunni sectarian forces. Sectarianism, the Shia-Sunni conflict, is a real curse for Pakistan. It is truncating the country by the middle. Shias maybe only 20% still. And the security establishment is very particular about the most extremist groups which are attacking Shias, including Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. Lashkar-e-Jhangvi is by far the most active terrorist Sunni sectarian group. The Saudis are supporting Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. This is not something the Pakistani security establishment appreciate. And this is the problem of my good Islamist who may not be your good Islamist. It's true vis-a-vis the India-Pakistan relations as well. You know, I don't go into that, but you see what I mean. But it was so upsetting for some of the Pakistani rulers that in 2015, a federal minister of Pakistan accused the Saudis of destabilizing Pakistan by supporting extremists. And that was a real problem because diplomatically it did not go very well. Now I reach the fourth factor, and of course this is Iran. You know, why can't Pakistan bow to Saudi Arabia? Because of Iran primarily. Because today in the Muslim world, this sectarian conflict has reached geopolitical dimensions, and Pakistan is one of the places where the proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia is taking place, like in Afghanistan, like in some other places. So if Pakistan agrees to follow Saudi Arabia, for instance, in the Yemen war, where the targets are the rebels, the Houthi rebels, this is interpreted by Iran as a casus belli. And this is exactly why they have said no in 2015. And for the Saudis and for the UAE, it was a real shock. They had never anticipated that Pakistan could say no to them. And of course, I've reached the last point for obvious reasons, because I'm back to the first sentence I've said. How do we interpret the appointment of Rail Sharif as the chief of this new coalition? Is it a sign of, yes, now we side with Saudi Arabia? Or is it a kind of compromise? We will not help you militarily in Yemen, but at least you'll get the former chief of army staff. Now, it's very important to interpret this move in one direction or the other. It's too early to say, There is much at stake behind. There is a lot at stake behind. And in a very specific context that is marked, as you all know, by the victory of Iran in Syria and the defeat of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. These countries, Saudi Arabia, may be feeling like failing where Iran is succeeding, which is not good. Because these countries, Saudi Arabia, feels like losing out, somewhat isolated. Of course, after what the Congress in the US has said against them as well. And they have a new, young defense minister who may be impulsive on the top of it. So all these factors are, I repeat, too early to interpret, but I would like the Indian media to look at these things more closely, because this is exactly in your neighborhood, as you all know. I stop here. And we have something like 20 minutes for a Q&A if you have questions. If you don't, it will be even easier, but... Yes? You may need a mic.
Thank you so much for the lecture. And there were certain things that I was sort of aware of and certain things which were new to me. But my question to you would be how you mentioned, let's say, Asif Ali Zardari and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Jinnah and all these people. My question would be, could you shed some light on, let's say, General Pervez Musharraf and his nexus or connection with Saudi Arabia, and what his stand was, because that name wasn't mentioned in your lecture. So if you could be able to shed some light on that.
Yeah, I'll be brief because it's rather opaque. But he went on exile also in Saudi Arabia. And what is so interesting is to see the Saudis as being the mediators after a coup or after the end of a coup. They were the mediators and bailed out Nawaz Sharif in 1999 when Musharraf took over. And they welcomed Nawaz Sharif and his family. When Musharraf had to leave the country, they were again mediating to make sure that something smooth could take place. So it's like a country that is investing in another country, making sure that it doesn't derail, making sure that you are still relating to the decision-making people and military people. So why Musharraf was so welcome was also that you don't want to lose this connection with the military. And Musharraf was protected by Rail Sharif, and so it was a good investment.
Any other question?
Yeah, obviously it's very interesting, the larger the political things you're talking about. Yeah, but I was thinking like obviously the work on Pakistan, it's anthropological work. I can see there is a literature coming out about post-Islamism, mostly about the kind of changes taking place, Humaira and all, Humaira's work, secularizing Islamists, no, that's the title itself. So she has pointed out many works pointed out Jamaat-e-Islami, even Jamaat-ud-Dalawa itself, no, there is a trend of secularizing itself, no. So, and with connection with that, the Arab Spring and the kind of changes even happened in Saudi later on, you know. So there is also a quest for more democratization, a kind of civil society uprisings and happening at a very subtle level. Obviously, it's not in the mainstream, in the political realm, as you have mentioned about it. So, what is your take on that? And yeah.
Well, I can't say for Saudi Arabia because I've not done this kind of research in Saudi Arabia, but in Pakistan there is no doubt that there is a civil society. And you would be very surprised, and I'm always very sad to hear that it's very difficult for Indians to go to Pakistan and for Pakistanis to come to India, because if you could see by yourself, of course, it would make more sense. But I can assure you that in a place like Karachi, you have universities which are absolutely first class and where students are looking ahead. Habib University, IBA in Karachi University, it's true in LUMS in Lahore, the same. These private universities or semi-private universities are one example. There are many others. NGOs, so many NGOs, the Human Rights Commission, which is an NGO, terrific job. Lawyers, Asma Jahangir, just to give one name. Newspapers, Dawn has more courage than many other newspapers in the world, and can expose real estate mismanagement for the army. So it's not as if, and that's why I wanted to be very cautious, it's not as if everything had gone towards Islamism and militarism. No way. And even the military forces are not supporting Islamist right or wrong. They have their own selections, and of course they use them, or they try to use them for one purpose that is not Islamization of society necessarily. It's purely instrumental. So yes, this is exactly why we need to be very careful and disaggregate and discriminate and not go by emotions or national sentiments.
Sorry, you did mention Afghanistan and the relationship of Pakistan with Afghanistan. I'm a little bit interested in knowing how do you see that relationship panning out with reference to Iran and Saudi?
Yeah, there was a very interesting article recently in the New York Times that said that in the years 2007, 2008, the Saudis tried to mediate between Karzai at that time and the Taliban, and this mediation was sabotaged by the Pakistanis. If this is true, and it can very much be true, you have the world picture in front of you. The Pakistanis want to be the ones who will make peace in Afghanistan, and it's very complicated. And it is complicated for many reasons, including one that is not often understood. Many Taliban are not happy with being the lackeys of Pakistan. They have a strong national sentiment. And that's also, by the way, why some of them have defected to ISIS. Because you're not that comfortable with the Taliban commanders still bowing to ISI. You prefer to have your global agenda and fight. Both Pakistan and Kabul. So this is one of the reasons why the conflict may go on. It's one of the factors, because to make peace for the Pakistanis is very difficult in these circumstances. What is new is the investment of China in the story. They have reached a plateau now, but 1 or 2 years ago, we saw the Chinese really paying attention to Afghanistan and considering that they had to settle this issue with the help of Pakistanis. But Pakistanis can't say no to China. They can't say no to Saudi Arabia. They can't say no to China. That's the big difference. Whether the Chinese are continuing their effort is difficult to say. The quadrilateral meetings are not taking place for more than 1 year now. The Uyghur problem can be interpreted as one good reason for investing themselves in the story, or on the contrary, not to continue to play with fire, because that can be a problem. You know, at the moment, it's very difficult to predict anything in Afghanistan. And the forces are neutralizing themselves. Everybody is waiting for one decision that Donald Trump will make. Are we withdrawing also from Afghanistan? And that would make a big difference. The 9,000 troops the US still have there are the only troops which make possible for the Ashraf Ghani's government not to fall. Yeah.
Sir, hello. Sir, you talk about that after 71 war, the Pakistan was left behind. So I believe after 71, there was apart from Saudi Arabia and Iran, there was one more nation, Libya, where the Muammar Gaddafi has his visit in Pakistan. So how that influenced the East and the African nation, the relation between the Libya and the Pakistan?
Influence who?
The other nation like Saudi Arabia and how the Pakistan sees that thing, the joining hands with the Libya at that time, who gave his nod for the nuclear propaganda for the Pakistan.
Well, I was not there when they talked behind closed doors, but clearly they were pulling in the same direction. You know, you must remember that in '74, in Lahore, when Bhutto welcomed the Islamic Organization Conference, there were King Faisal. By the way, Lyalpur became Faisalabad at that time. There was Arafat. There was Gaddafi, and the Lahore Stadium was renamed Gaddafi Stadium. It's still there. It is still the Gaddafi Stadium. So they were somewhat contributing toward the same cause. What was more surprising was that we could expose the smuggling of nuclear technology from Pakistan throughout the rest of the world because of Libya. Because it's when near Tripoli a ship full of centrifuges was somewhat handed over by the Gaddafi government that it was easy to see the AQ Khan network are still selling things across the world. But that came much later. Yeah.
So, the story of the history of this starts off with there's a great cultural connectedness between India and Pakistan, and it's the war in '71 that leads to insecurity that drives Pakistan west, and then it's been a messy sort of set of developments. Is there any hope that this cultural connectedness can be used to reverse the situation? Is there any hope for there to be sort of a more sense of security that enables Pakistan to not have to know totally?
Yeah. Well, cultural connectedness is one of the reasons why we can have hope, because it's still there. Of course, there is, the more time passes, the more distance increases, but still, that's one common ground. And there is something like South Asian Islam. The other hope may come from economic complementarity. You know, it's absolutely foolish not to trade more. There is so much complementarity. And by the way, some of this is already used because there is Dubai, there are other places where you can trade. But it's ridiculous to trade in Dubai when you are neighbors. Makes no sense. So there is some hope coming from that side. One day it will become absolutely necessary. And ironically, the China-Pakistan economic corridor may open eyes on both sides because some economic activity may become more vibrant on that side as well. The cons are unfortunately more powerful for the moment, because the sense of insecurity is cultivated, and I would say on both sides. So the Pakistani army keeps telling everybody that Pakistan is not safe. That's why you need such a big army. That's why you need weapons and ballistic missiles, and they are investing huge amount in this. So you have to first expose this discourse, which is not easy when propaganda is everywhere. And then you have to dislodge these people who have a vested interest in fear from power. Who will do that? It's really a remote prospect for the moment. And the only possibility would be that China again pushes the Pakistani generals in that direction, but they are not in that mood for the moment. And the anti-Indian attitude of the Chinese have never been so obvious as in 2016. So you see, I still hope, but you have to be lucid, and for the moment there is hardly any reason to see this tension diminishing, plus the Kashmir problem that is, of course, underreported in the media, but very much there too. Two last questions, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a few points to raise. These are not questions per se, but to understand the larger background of the thing. You mentioned a few aspects of the relation between Saudi, Pakistan, India, all the players in place, from the perspective of Islamic countries and their interests. But I felt that two other things that probably was not touched because it was a short presentation was the larger frame of the Cold War era, the US and the USSR, groupings, and probably their machinations for the control of oil in the territory. So the oil politics was not mentioned as a background to these issues. I have a feeling that these two together would have contributed to the kind of groupings that has happened. Plus, the Middle East, not the Middle East, but the eastern part had nationalistic governments in Iraq, in Libya, in Egypt, etc., etc., etc. Before some of them were destabilized and the kind of regimes that we have today have been put in place. Saddam is actually a classic case, nurtured by the West, brought down by the West, and now Iraq is kind of shambles. They were not Islamic governments in that sense, but they were nationalistic governments. But there were other probably political reasons for that. Some of which actually aggravates probably the kind of political Islamic leanings that states have started to show. I would desist to call them as Islamic countries. They are Muslim countries probably. Some of the states wouldn't agree. Saudi Arabia probably is not even in that sense an Islamic country.
So that was a comment.
Yeah.
Not
India,
a question.
India probably is more Islamic than Saudi Arabia.
We can take one more question, otherwise he has to leave.
Yeah, no, but
okay.
I would want to hear what the reactions are on that context which was not mentioned.
Oh, that will make one more lecture. No, just I will just pick up one thing. We are in the post-Cold War era for sure. And one sign of that is the rapprochement between Russia and Pakistan. The closer India is to the US, the closer Russia is to Pakistan. Where will that stop? Is a real question, because Pakistan had already some Chinese support. If they get some Russian support, and that will of course be useful in Afghanistan also, because they want to make this part safer. So this is a new world.
To actually add to what Bimal asked, can China be actually roped in, to figure out?
I love the way we are, handling countries.
1.5 billion people are not roped in that easily.
No, in fact...
Christophe, actually I was slightly nervous before the lecture, whether in a school of architecture we'll have enough audience and enough questions on international relationships. But then, all of us are armchair analysts, especially when it comes to international affairs. So
this is the...
gets all of us interested.
Yeah. We had one last question, I think, no?
Yes, one last quick, there has to be a short question.
Yeah.
The question was like you talk about the two different classes, like in Indian context and South Asian context, it's more about Sufi Muslims, and in that Arabian context is Wahhabism. But nowadays, like looking at the past 3-4 years, we talk about the radicalization in terms of like people joining ISIS from different parts of the city. So how do you think like this transition came with respect to Indian Muslims? I mean, there has been a growing tension on respect to the Indian continent itself. Not we have to look at the borders issues or the other Saudi Arabia or Iran. But when we look at our own country, we look at like the daily news of tensions growing up between like the Muslims and the body. So if Sufism was not supposed to be like this, in which the radicalization, it was more related to Wahhabist. So how do you think this transition came in the Indian context?
Well, transition would suggest that there is a sense of direction and that we could not avoid this sense of direction. That is dangerous. Hopefully, India will retain the old Islamic culture it had. But of course, to make sure that this is the case, secularism has to prevail. There's a precondition for this. Secularism has never been anti-religious or a-religious. It has been the equal recognition of all religions on a par. If you keep that, the attraction of more radical versions of Islam may not find any taker. It's not because you are working in the Gulf and come back after many years for retirement that you become a Salafi. It's for other reasons. But of course, many politicians will find it easier to find some other and to make it really different. The more different you make them, the more different they'll become. And this is a place where you have 170 million Muslims. So this is food for thought.
That's a fantastic end note. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.